It's part 2 of my spur-of-the-moment crazy timeline project of making an 18th century outfit for the first time and all hand sewn. Last time we talked about making the shift or chemise, and today's video is all about the under-petticoat, which is the easiest piece to make. So if you're new to sewing or new to the 18th century, this is probably the best place to start. So the under-petticoat is a simple rectangle skirt with a pleated waist and ties for a closure. It adds extra volume to the overall look of the 18th century skirt and is actually worn under the pair of stays, which is just kind of interesting to me. Anyway, I am using the American Duchess Guide to 18th century dressmaking, but you don't really need the book to learn how to make it. It's really a very basic skirt and construction. So I'm making mine out of a sturdy linen purchased from Dharma Trading Company, linked down below, and my skirt piece measures 30 inches tall and 78 inches wide. So the book does recommend more width to this under-petticoat, but I had a limited amount of fabric, so I couldn't make it as wide. But they do also say that you just want to be able to walk unrestricted when wearing it. I am using the thread drawing method for cutting this rectangle piece. I used this method in cutting out the shift, and I found it so helpful for cutting a piece on the straight grain. And this fabric was extra easy to use this method on because the threads are quite thick and strong, and so it was super easy to just pull out a thread and then have a perfectly straight guide for cutting out this rectangle piece. So there's just one seam to sew up, and that will be at the center back, but you do need to leave about 10 inches unsewn for the opening at the waist. So as I mentioned, I'm completely hand sewing the pieces for this project, so that's what's being shown, but this can easily all be done by machine. As you might know from the shift video, and I just fell in love with the Mantua Maker's seam and decided it needed to be used for this seam as well. So I will link the tutorial in the description and up above, but here is a short version. With right sides together, the bottom edge is offset from the upper edge, and this amount is based on your desired seam size. So with the thick fabric I'm working with, I decided to go with 1/4 inch seams. So one edge is placed a 1/4 inch away from the other. Then the outer edge is turned over the inner edge and basted in place. Once basted, this edge is then turned over again, and with a hem stitch, you sew through the first folded edge and the 2 layers of fabric below it. So when the seam is opened up from the right side, it looks just like a basic seam, but on the inside, the raw edges are all contained. It's just magic. I love this seam so much. But anyway, for the opening at the waist, the 2 edges are hemmed using a 1/4 inch hem and hem stitched in place. Then for the actual hem of this petticoat, I decided on a larger hem just to add a little more structure to it, and so I did a 1/4 inch turn and then a 1/2 inch turn, so it created a 1/2 inch hem, and then this is hem stitched in place. So you now have a skirt that only has one raw edge, and that's the waist. This is then pleated up. At the center front, there is a large box pleat, about 5 inches wide, and both the pleats making up the box pleat are about 2.5 inches. Then going off in each direction, smaller pleats are made to create the correct waist measurement. As the American Duchess Guide to Dressmaking book reminds us, pleating was not a science back then, and it's okay if they're uneven. I still wanted to be fairly even with pleats. That's just me. I like even things, but I did just eyeball it and slowly adjust it as needed. Mine ended up being 1.25 inch pleats laying right next to each other. So once I played around with the pleats and created the right waist measurement, which was 28 inches, I then secured all the pleats in place with a large backstitch, making sure to secure all the layers of the pleats in each stitch. The last step is to attach a waistband, which is just a piece of 1-inch cotton twill tape. It needs to be long enough to go around the waist and have tails on each side to tie into a bow. So I decided on 16-inch tails, and you want 2 tails, 1 on each side, so I cut my waistband at 60 inches long. On the right side of the skirt, match up the center front and line it up a 1/2 inch in from the raw edge of the petticoat. This edge of the twill tape is then stitched in place with a fine hem stitch. Once that's done, the other edge of the tape is folded over the raw edges of the skirt to the back and hem stitched in place also. Once both edges are secure, it's time to finish up the tails. So just fold the tape in half and do a fine whip stitch to connect the 2 edges of the tape. When you get to the end, fold in the raw edges of the tape about 1/4 inch and whip stitch that edge. And there you have it. It is a finished under petticoat. So it took me about 3 hours to complete this piece, all hand sewn, so much quicker if you decide on a machine. Overall, this is just a very easy undergarment to make and definitely a great starting point if you're just getting into this era of fashion. I hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for the next video where we'll talk about the false rump. And as always, thank you for watching, and a huge thank you to my patrons, YouTube members, and Instagram subscribers for their continued support. See you next time.